Hey guys. Hi y'all. Welcome to another week of the Biz Buzz. Let me add a little bit about here on what we are going to be talking about today. Um, my name is Samantha McDonald. I'm the digital news editor at FN. And, if you've joined us in the past few Fridays, you'll know that what we do here is break down a subject in the fashion and footwear industries that's been trending or talked about in the past week. So this week, I'm going to actually bring in our deputy editor, Sheena Butler Young, to join us in this conversation. And she is going to, help us provide a little bit more color into this as well as myself. So stay with us for a second, and I'm going to call her in right here.
Hey,
And we're here with her.
hey, happy Friday.
Hi, Sheena. Happy Friday. I feel like,
Let me turn my
because we do
volume
this
up a
every
little.
Friday, it's always a good segue into the weekend.
Yes.
So I was giving a little bit of background on what we're going to be talking about this week, but I also wanted to bring you in because, we're sure that they've been seeing the headlines, and this week it's all about bankruptcies.
Yeah.
We've seen J. Crew go bankrupt on Monday, and John Barbados on Wednesday, and even Marcus and Aldo yesterday. So it's been a
Yeah.
really tough week for retailers. And what we're going to do for y'all is give a little background on those bankruptcies amid the pandemic, and describe what it means to really go bankrupt,
Yeah.
and give you some color on what retailers could potentially be next.
Yeah.
So, Sheena,
So you want to take it from the biggest news of the week, right?
mhm.
It's just been, I think, to your point, just to reinforce, it's just been such a devastating time for retail from, the COVID crisis down to just digital disruption in 2015 all the way forward. A lot of retailers are feeling the pressure. It's been rough. Neiman Marcus is the big name of the week. I mean, I think that we know recently what's been happening with COVID-19, but their struggles really go back to 2013 when they got a private equity buyout. So a little bit of background on that. When you do a private equity buyout, right, you take on a lot of debt, and you can know this as a personally and as a business. If you have a lot of debt, it really handicaps your ability to do a lot of things, right? So
Yeah.
Neiman, like some of its peers around this time of private equity boom, they took on some debt, they sold themselves, and it was right before digital disruption in 2015. So when they went into that, they were already a little bit handicapped with
Mm-hmm.
the amount of with
Right.
the lack of liquidity. And then fast forward to now, there's COVID, so it's been a
It
as
works.
is the case with these things, a confluence of events that led them to this path. Let's talk a little bit, Sam, about some of the people that they owe. They owe a lot of big
Yeah.
names,
Yeah. I mean,
a
you've
lot of
heard
money.
there are a lot of these major luxury brands that are also among its creditors, and they have very, very large unsecured claims. I mean, it owes more than $6 million to Chanel, and over $4 million to Veronica Beard. We've got Dolce and Gabbana, Gucci, some of Tapestry owned brands like Stuart Weitzman, and even Louboutin, which is a big player in our space. So you do hear a lot of these fashion labels as part of the lengthy list of creditors. I think it is also important to note, we did a story this week about My Teresa, which was, bought out by Neiman Marcus Group Limited in 2014, and that is not going to be included in the Chapter 11 proceedings
Yeah.
because a couple years ago they were transferred actually to Neiman Marcus Group Limited's parent, which is the Neiman Marcus Group Incorporated. So there are different rules under that credit agreement, and it's not going to be affected as part of these bankruptcy proceedings.
Let's talk a little bit about, when we talk about these big brands that are owed money, when a
Mhm.
company goes bankrupt, it's not just that company that's affected. There's a ripple effect across the industry. So you're going to have creditors like your Christian Louboutins and your Jimmy Choos that are going to be owed millions and may or may not be able to recoup those millions. But then there's the potential loss of a place to sell goods into and to sell goods out of. So there's these kinds of things. When we say it's a rough time, they really impact all of the industry.
Mhm.
Just yesterday, Aldo, which they're not publicly traded, so we don't have a lot of intel into their finances, but for the most part they've been doing pretty well recently. But yesterday they announced that they had filed sort of what we consider a bankruptcy equivalent in Canada, and then Chapter 15 here in the United States, and then they're prepping a filing for Switzerland. So you've got, retailers big and small having to secure themselves through bankruptcy, or perhaps it could be a ticket to their end. I
Right.
want to talk a little bit about J. Crew.
Yeah, because I think Aldo was a little unexpected, but I think what we heard about with J. Crew is they actually became the first retailer to file for bankruptcy during this pandemic, which it's basically because this pandemic had forced so many stores across the country to close. And but for J. Crew, I think it is important to note that their struggles had existed long before the coronavirus. You know, in the
Right.
past years, analysts had been sort of down on J. Crew because the company has seen, as you know, a lot of executive turmoil. There were very disappointing earnings results. And then there was this shift to fast fashion and e-commerce several years ago, and it was just unable to be as agile.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think a lot of these problems also stem with the inability to or lack of brand identity. So it tried to cater to this more upscale audience, and
Yeah.
it was proven to be unable to do so. And these fashion missteps, just couldn't quite be saved by they did a couple things like the launch of a new loyalty program. They had new
Yeah.
collection launches. They, even launched a third-party marketplace. Those were unable to save it. But to your point with Neiman Marcus too, J. Crew was also snapped up in a private equity buyout. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
It
yeah,
doesn't position you very well when
exactly.
you're in debt, and this is not all obviously related to debt, like, but if you have debt, you really can't invest. And then in the case of J. Crew, like you said, they kind of tried to switch directions, and in terms of who they were speaking to, and it ended up being a misstep for them. Someone that we're watching, or a company that we're watching right now, is J.C. Penney, which had kind of fell victim to the same thing around 2011. Right, so they brought in Ron Johnson, who had worked his magic at Apple and I think a couple other big names, and he was supposed to do the same thing at J.C. Penney, and he
Right.
made a lot of bold moves. And what we saw was that it didn't resonate with their core demographic. So I think what a lot of retailers struggle with right now is how do you bring fresh product, fresh marketing, fresh initiatives, and tap new audiences, but at the same time retain the ones that have been loyal to you
Yeah,
all along
because
the
the
way.
keep space is
I
always
I think that's going to be and this was started for JCPenney in 2011, which is, gosh, almost a decade ago at this point. And we've seen them falter sort of ever since. Executive changes, a lot of issues with their stock, which is now, I
on.
think the last we reported was like 24 cents, which puts them at risk of delisting. So a lot of struggles there, and a lot of it really places them on bankruptcy watch. It
Yeah.
all None of this is helped by COVID.
Right,
Stores
because like
are
over
closed.
the recent weeks, you've
Yeah.
heard that they were in advanced stages of these bankruptcy talks, and so they're speaking with their lenders about what they can do about their debt. This loan that they're trying to discover based off of the reports that we're hearing, it could go up to $1 million, and they do have a debt load of $4 billion. So, we did get in touch with some sources close to J.C. Penney, and they did tell us that. Bankruptcy may not necessarily be imminent, and they're looking to explore some financial options in the meantime. And I think it's also worth noting that, over this past week, we've heard them sort of be in a little bit of a dispute with Sephora.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
yeah,
Hi,
it's a
Erica.
big name. So,
um, yeah, no, I mean, I think that, I want you to continue with that, because it's kind of, we were talking about this earlier about the fact that you see a lot of partnerships right now being challenged. So you've got Sephora, a really trailblazer in the beauty industry, really doing a great job at speaking to a range of demographics, but especially the Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. And they've just been kind of firing on all cylinders prior to the pandemic. And then you've got J.C. Penney, which has been faltering for the better part of a decade. And now they're kind of at this critical impasse in the partnership that ended up taking them to court. I mean, thankfully they settled, but it wasn't unheard of or unexpected for Sephora allegedly to attempt to nix that partnership, because we made the joke iron sharpens iron. But if you've got two companies and one is really soaring and the other one is faltering, you have an imbalance, and it feels like one's carrying the other, which
right.
is going to be another rippling effect of the pandemic and of the bankruptcies that will follow.
Right. And I think because of that, we can segue into some of these other potential retail casualties that we've
Yeah.
been hearing about during this pandemic. I mean, another big name that we've heard about is Lord & Taylor. We've heard Francesca's, which now has a market cap of under $8 billion. 8 million, I should correct myself, 8 million.
Yeah,
So,
which is it's not a very high market cap.
mhm.
For context, I mean, I think it can sound like a lot of money to people, but we're talking about market caps usually in the billions in a lot of retail, and so it puts them in a tough spot. Lord and Taylor, there's another one that if they don't take the bankruptcy route, there's a lot of, we've heard from sources close to the situation and just from other reports that a liquidation after the pandemic might be the next course for them. And just keep in mind that one of the things with what's happening with coronavirus is if you wanted to liquidate right now, probably can't, right? Because there's no stores open. So, which leads us, I think, to kind of this idea of what bankruptcy is and what it's supposed to mean, right?
Yeah. Because just because a retailer, can reorganize through bankruptcy doesn't necessarily mean it's holding these going out of business sales or these liquidation sales or it's shutting down all its stores. The point of a bankruptcy is essentially to make right a business that has taken on too much debt, or it allows a company to restructure while it continues to operate. So we've seen examples of this in the past. Aeropostale, Sears last year, which went bankrupt, Forever 21. But getting into that meaning, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be hosting these liquidation sales. And like you say, it's not necessarily possible during
there's a question, I don't know if you can see better than me, but what does it, and Payless is another good example that Erica, fabulously Erica, just pointed out. What does it practically mean that Neiman's creditors are taking over? Do they have the ability to change the entire Neiman's landscape? How do the creditors work together? Oh, wow, that's a good one. I feel like we need the bankruptcy attorney for that one.
Went in for that.
I will say when I covered some of the when we talk to lawyers and background that, right now, the big creditors, because of the pandemic, I think that a lot of creditors are going to be willing to work with companies and try to, one lawyer said, these creditors don't want to own Neiman's. That's ridiculous. That was his quote to me. I don't know that. I don't know. I'm not in these conversations, but this is kind of my understanding. Will Neiman's no longer be luxury? We really couldn't say, but we think that one of the things that we've heard from attorneys, bankruptcy attorneys, is that the pandemic in some ways it's a good time for retailers to file if they were already struggling, because you have a little bit of leverage. You can't really liquidate. A lot of, you see from landlords working with tenants that were about to be evicted, there's a lot of willingness of companies to work with each other. I think that in the case of Neiman's, from what we've heard from attorneys, they're probably going to have their creditors working with them a lot more than against them, because of we're all kind of in a tough economic time. So in some ways it could be good for them. I think Neiman's is so synonymous with luxury that I can't imagine them departing from that. I don't think it makes sense. I don't think it benefits the creditors to try to take them in a direction that is not synonymous with who they are. Do you want to add something to that, Sam?
Yeah, sure. Because I was also trying to think of, another luxury player in that space who recently went bankrupt, which is Barney's. And as you know, something there happened completely different from what is happening now with a lot of the luxury players. And that does not necessarily mean to say that luxury is not doing well. We have been hearing some experts say that luxury is actually, it has been doing just fine this entire time. And then you hear other people saying the exact opposite. And it's a testament to how much the consumer landscape is going to change after the pandemic, because there is some sort of indication that discretionary spending will suffer. So it is something that it needs to be brought up, and I do think that this is a good segue into another option that companies do have when they do file for bankruptcy, which is it's called a debt for equity swap.
Yes.
What this is it's like a refinancing deal that allows these debtor or the borrowers, which is in this case, I brought it up earlier with J. Crew being an example of this, where they can transform their loans or these loans into like shares of their stock or their equity. So we're going to be seeing a little bit more of that as we move forward, because the option for a liquidation is not quite possible right now.
Yeah. And I think also back to the point of the example of Barney's, and we saw that, they got bought by Authentic Brands Group, and Authentic so far, everything's prior to COVID, right? Like we don't know what the new normal is going to be, but prior to COVID, ABG was really leaning on the fact that these are brands that still have a big value proposition to consumers. They mean something. So Neiman means something to people. We like to say internally, or I like to say that, when you see these big beloved American brands or nostalgic brands like J. Crew and even Neiman's, take this path, there's all these people on social media that are bemoaning this demise and are upset. But a lot of times we say that you're both sad and you're both culpable, right? Because you didn't go shop there, help them demise. But what we know when we see this, and J. Crew saw it a lot across social, all these fans are saying J. Crew, hope it doesn't go away. It means so much to me. It's that there's brand equity there. And so if there's a value attached to that brand, there's a good chance that you can figure out a way to move it forward, albeit differently. It's not going to look the same. You're not going to have all those stores that you once had. Yes, there's value in the brands themselves, 100%. So you're not going to see that. But so ABG did the same thing with Barney's, where they took that brand. They're going to do shop in shops with Saks. They're going to maybe have Barney's branded merchandise, because there's stuff you can do. You just have to do it in a different way. You have to learn from where they failed and sort of move it forward. And licensing opportunities, which is ABG's kind of, that's their thing. They'll tell you themselves that they don't make a single thing. They license. So they can take that brand name, Instagaz, great point. They can take that brand and do other things with it, which is always an important avenue when you go bankrupt.
Yeah. And I keep thinking about, even if these companies do manage to survive the pandemic, a lot of these already struggling retailers, they're going to go through the struggle of maybe not even being able to afford business as usual. There are a lot of costs that go into run the companies, particularly after this pandemic too, getting those workers back to business. You're going to think about employee benefits. You're going to think about advertising costs, which, advertising has changed so much now with the pandemic. And other fees.
Now you have to buy sanitizing stations for your, we've been talking about this a lot, that there's so much cost associated with moving forward, and plexiglass at every cashier. I'm going to pull up this question. It has appeared that Net-a-Porter and Moda Operandi have merged luxury and online, but Barney's, Neiman Marcus, and Saks have struggled with this pivot. What future do you see? I mean, I think that luxury, I'll start and I'll let Sam take it from there. I think that luxury has struggled with this idea that digital was not as elevated as the store experience. And I think they struggled with figuring out a way to really bring that in-store experience, that luxury vibe, to a digital space. And I think that a lot of the traditional players, so when the names that you mentioned are a little more, they're newer. The traditional players really struggle with how to replicate that luxury experience that they have in stores, whether it's, the sit and fit, the high touch environment, the service environment. I think they really struggle to figure out how to do that online. And so they kind of maybe resisted it. Whereas those that were born in commerce, or that were just brands that were newer, they kind of understood it more. Especially direct-to-consumer brands. They really got that. And direct-to-consumer and e-commerce only sites, they really, pure plays, I should say, they really got that right away. And we saw it on the outside of luxury with anybody else, like a Macy's, a JCPenney. It's a tough transition.
Yeah. I think it makes me think a lot about just these omni-channel services that retailers could be offering during this time. And a lot of the retailers that did manage to get into, both this buy online, pick up on store, curbside pickup, those kinds of services, they sort of have a leg up now. And it also brings, I guess, up to mind the issue of experiential retail, which a lot of these brick and mortar retailers have been really sort of investing in, but they've been adding experiences, whether it's just to win over new customers, to create a sort of new community of the customers that are existing, and give basically visitors something to post on social, which social now is the name of the game. So I assume that is going to be encountering a lot of troubles now that we're going to be thinking about life post pandemic, and a lot of people are expected to be flocking to stores at any time soon.
Yeah, I hate to take it negative, but that's a big thing that we're looking at next, is kind of, brick and mortar saving grace was supposed to be in-store experience. If you have to remove, as we've seen with Nordstrom, if you have to remove high touch encounters and all the service elements of what you do, which Nordstrom said they're not going to be able to do for a little while, because safety first, right? You can't have live events, you can't have in-store events. I think that retailers are really going to have to pivot digitally. from what we're hearing, because there's just not that ability to do an in-store experience is really going to diminish moving forward. Someone asked, how do you see opportunities for manufacturers? I'm not sure if means as far as producing for brands or brands themselves.
Yeah, I
And
mean, there is a lot of supply chain disruption right now. So we are just going to basically, you know, what a lot of experts are saying, they kind of take it day by day and they can plan for as much inventory as, you know, in the next couple of months. But really, a lot of the inventory that has already been planned for spring and summer, it's already in there. So I think you hear a lot from retailers that are going to have to cancel orders or, you know,
they've
sort of,
been doing that. And
yeah, man.
there's opportunity in off price right now. I think as far as manufacturing, another thought I had was, obviously if you're a brand that's making your own product, someone said this here, but DTC is a huge opportunity. A lot of brands that we spoke to about kind of the impact of bankruptcy on them, the ones that have a strong DTC presence, direct to consumer presence, they really feel pretty incubated against the larger impact of these big retail names going bankrupt. So you can still sell into retail. This is not me giving advice. Experts say you can still sell into retail. You can still have these great wholesale partnerships, but it is crucial to have a strong direct to consumer presence, a strong direct to consumer plan. We saw Nike do it a couple years ago, where they really leaned into their DTC business, because, you know, Nike is very innovative, very forward thinking. We know this. And they saw the opportunity. They saw, maybe not COVID, but they saw that, you know, you don't have true control over your supply chain, over your brand identity, that you can be really swept up in a lot of other partners' struggles. So it's important to have partnerships, but you have to be mindful of, you know, when things go wrong for that partner, what it means for you.
Definitely.
I think that's all I got. But this has been, again, this is the Biz Buzz. Tough week for retail, but I think lots of hope in DTC and e-commerce, and figuring out, you know, how to make the stores useful and curbside pickup, other opportunities.
Yeah. Because there are opportunities out there. You know, a lot of the retailers who are getting digitization nowadays, they do have a stronger arm with this. So it is kind of, you know, it bodes well for the industry that there are other options, and it's going to really change the face of the brick and mortar landscape, unfortunately. But we'll see how that is in a few months, hopefully, when we can sort of get an idea of what's going to happen out there post-pandemic. But I think we tackled quite a bit for a Friday, don't you think?
Yeah, happy Friday. You know, it's time to get into the weekend. Hopefully retail has changed for the better. Thank you guys always for joining us on the Biz Buzz. Have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend, everybody, and stay safe.